It is Bones, and today we're going to do a little top 10 list on the top 10 regular costume Bruce Wayne Batman figures released so far by McFarlane's DC Multiverse line. Now, we all know that McFarlane has released tons of Batman in the line, so we do have many to choose from. This also means that I'm going to do this probably in two different videos. Today will be the Bruce Wayne comic sort of standard version of Batman, and next time I will be doing the Elseworlds, like out there different versions of Batman or Bruce Wayne. That one's going to be pretty interesting, but today I'm going to want to focus mainly on more of a comic book style or comic looking Batman figure. If you want to narrow it down to which ones look the best, scale the best, and display really well. So there's going to be different criterias that I look at. Of course, this is my list. Everybody's list is going to be different. Of course, we do know that action figures are subjective. Everybody likes different styles, different looks for their own personal Batman. This is just my list, so don't be afraid to let me know what you think. But let's go ahead and get into it. Now, I have been collecting Batman action figures for years. I started off actually with the Legends of the Dark Knight, which was one of my favorite lines, but I was always a big fan of the original Batman Mattel line, taking us into DC superheroes and then finally into DC Universe Classics. And the end of the run for Mattel. Today this list will be focused on what you can get from McFarlane's DC Multiverse line. Now, before we get into it, I do want to give some honorable mentions, sort of, and this is because Bruce Wayne does use a lot of different versions of bat suits. I mean, it just depends on the situation. So here are some that aren't necessarily like Batmans from another multiverse or from Elseworlds. These are more just Bruce Wayne in a different type of suit or outfit depending on the conditions that he's going to go into. So first of all, we're looking at stuff like this Batman from The Endless Winter, which is more of a cold temperature Batman suit, being protected from the lower temperatures. Now, this is a really nice looking figure. I think he's underrated because he has tons of cool sculpt work, tons of detail. The clear red lenses that he has on his faceplate is awesome. Original sculpt down to the boots. I mean, this is an awesome figure. Of course, this was in the Endless Winter wave, so he came with a piece to build the Frost King. But even on his own, he is an awesome, awesome figure. Now, I do actually want to do a custom version of this, so I haven't decided really on the color scheme. I do have the figure ready to go, but maybe sometime soon I will do that custom and, show you guys or put it on the gram. But another figure that is something like this, which is actually one of my favorite figures, is the Hazmat suit Batman. Now, this is actually the light up version, and this was a gold label version, has a little bit more paint and wash to it. But another underrated figure. I had a lot of fun when I first picked this one up, taking figure photography and posing them, and he's a really fun figure. You could sort of like pass him over, but once you get him in hand, he's actually really sweet. Now, he does have a clear protective shield on his face, and he does have the light that lights up. Now, on mine, I did change the hands to give him a little bit more larger and stylized hands, but really fun figure. You can also get the other version, which is just a standard version with less paint, but that's an awesome version of Bruce Wayne going into a toxic scenario. Now, another one I want to mention is, of course, the Hellbat suit armor. Now, this is when Bruce Wayne went back to planet Apocalypse to try and rescue Damien. But this is, came out in the first wave from McFarlane, but is a beautifully sculpted, big hunk of plastic figure. I bought multiples of these when they first came out. Has a giant wingspan, which typically we don't really see from McFarlane anymore, but definitely a cool figure to have in your collection. But now let's go ahead and get into the list. Of course, number 10, this is a very divisive figure, and that is the Batman 1000, the original Batman released by McFarlane. Now this is the first dark version and does have a lot of faults, but I also have sort of a soft spot for him since he is the first Batman from the line. I mean, the head is a little small, the feet are a little big, the articulation wasn't exactly there, but a lot of the points from McFarlane's articulation are actually there, just a little bit restricted. But I have actually come across people that love this figure for some reason. He's okay to me. I always knew we would progress and get into better looking Batman. They did actually do a blue alternate version, and this version has the big yellow oval, which was pretty interesting. But of course, my favorite is always going to be my custom that I actually made by swapping parts of each of these into making this dark schemed oval Batman. So yeah, although this is not official, this is my favorite version of this figure, and I'm happy to have these actually in my collection. But that's number 10, the Batman 1000. Now coming in at number 9, coming in next, if you kind of want a standard version, now I know this is actually from Death Metal, but he actually wears kind of a representation of the Rebirth suit, and he's a really awesome looking Batman. Now on mine, I have actually added some fists. That kind of gives him a more gritty, like streetwise feel to him, ready to, battle the criminals on the streets. But this figure always had a lot of character. It was always really fun to pose around and play with, even though he is kind of a simple design. But the suit had tons of sculpt work and texture. Now they did release a second version of this, which was a little bit more battle damage and had a little bit of blood on him. And they actually painted the underside of the cape purple, which matches the comics. But I still think, even though that one's pretty nice, I really like this original release. It just gives you a more standard Batman feel that you could use on your shelf as a regular Bruce Wayne Batman. This is where we first saw that head plug that McFarlane likes to use, where the head is one piece and actually gets plugged into the lower neck, and that makes you lose articulation in the head. So it kind of limits the articulation. I was never really a big fan of this, but I have come to appreciate this figure and what it brings to the table. Now coming in next, number 8 is going to be the Batman from the Page Punchers, Black Adam. Now the reason he's so low on the list is more of a tactical version. They did go with a weird color scheme, even though this is a completely original sculpt for a Batman. And another thing we're going to have to talk about is the scale. Now if you look at the scale of this Dark Knight Metal's Batman, he is actually pretty large compared to this Page Puncher's Batman, who's on the shorter side. Not a big fan of the head sculpt as well. He has like a weird grimace on his face. I have seen a lot of people put this one with their Justice League Dark setup, so that's pretty cool, pretty interesting that they choose to go with him, but he kind of does fit well in there. Little bit of paint detail, pretty interesting cape that they went with for him as well, with a lot of cool texture. But that's why he's not really one of my favorites. But he is a unique Batman that you could have in your collection. Now coming in at number 7, we're going to have the actual Rebirth Batman that they released. Now this is actually a really good looking Batman figure. Beautiful cape. They did have the purple underneath. Awesome head sculpt. The only detraction from this would be that it's really small. And you cannot head swap this with a lot of the Batman figures because it is so tiny. But as far as sculpt work and design, he looks really good. I just think that the lower body is really wide, but the upper body is really narrow, which gives him that weird look and also makes him really small in stature. So if you're looking for a shorter Batman that you want to match up with other figures, then this is probably the figure for you because, like I said, awesome head sculpt, beautiful design of the costume, a lot of cool detail. They've never reused this body. They could have beefed it up and made him a little bit taller and reused it, but they have not. But depending on what you want, if you scale him, now all of these figures I'm going to scale with this Tim Drake Robin because a lot of people think he's a little bit taller of a sidekick for Batman. So that'll give us a little idea of the scale. And if you put him next to this Rebirth Batman, he's more to match up with smaller characters if you really want to use him or display him on his own, which a lot of the figures from McFarlane can actually be done. And I think McFarlane even actually has that in mind, that he thinks people are going to display these like on their own, on their desk or whatever. So being a mass market line, that's kind of, I think, what he's going for. But sometimes we do enjoy scaling them up with the rest of our DC line. So that's the Rebirth Batman. An awesome figure, just a little bit small for my taste. Now coming in at number 6, this is actually going to be the Dark Knight Returns Batman. Now a lot of people like to call these versions, no matter who makes the Dark Knight Returns Batman, a lot of people like to call them like Fat Batman or Old Batman, but of course we know that this is merely muscle maturity at its finest. He's a built Breakhouse Batman. That's awesome. Love displaying him with the 2 fists. He looks ready to throw down and get it on with the mutant leader. Now, one thing about this figure that I actually never really noticed is that he is also on the shorter side. Now, he does display well with the rest of the Dark Knight Returns figures, but if you put him with other figures, he is pretty short. Like I said, we'll compare him with this Tim Drake, and you could see that I think he might even be shorter than him or like exactly the same size. So if you were going to display this Batman, it's either going to be on his own or on the horse, which is another awesome way to display him, or with the other figures from the Dark Knight Returns wave, which kind of pigeonholes you into one way that you could display him, but also is cool because that's like a whole different world of its own, coming straight out of the comics. That is the Dark Knight Returns Batman. Now, I actually did a custom of this figure because a lot of people weren't really happy with this head sculpt, so I did this custom on my own with a head sculpt that I bought off of eBay, added some shading to the suit, and also repainted the belt. But really fun figure. I really love my repainted one, but you can never go wrong with the original standard release. Awesome looking figure. Now this is the halfway point, so this one's going to be a little bit stretching it, but coming in at number 5 is going to be the Page Punchers Injustice Batman. Now, I had not really looked at this figure well, but when I was making my list, I did notice him. Now, he is kind of based on the game, but also he's based more on the comic book that this wave was based on. So that is why I went ahead and threw him into this lineup. But the other thing is that if you look at him, he does look like your standard Bruce Wayne Batman, just with a little bit of armor plating. But aside from that, I mean, you can put him in and use him as your standard Batman. Now, one thing I didn't notice about this guy as well is completely new sculpt, no reused parts at all. They have not reused this figure. I'm sure they might in the future. The cape has a really distinctive texture on it that's pretty awesome. If you look at it, if you've never noticed the texture that the cape has, it's really interesting, kind of like a hexagon kind of microfiber texture to the cape, which is really interesting. But he also scales more in the normal size. He's not too small, but he's not large at all. So when you put him up next to the Tim Drake, He is slightly taller than him, but not by much. But as I said, this is another figure that you could use in your standard setup just as a regular Bruce Wayne Batman. Awesome head sculpt, awesome texture detail, awesome sculpt work, great articulation. All of these are fun to pose and take photos with. That's why they are in the top 10. But that is the midway point, and that is the Injustice Batman from Page Punchers. Now we're getting into the nitty gritty. This is going to be the hardest ones. I had to, decide where I was going to put them. And of course, in the end, it's not going to be what everybody else thinks. But for me, a lot of factors go into this. And this is basically, I have this test called the put it down factor. And that is that when you pick up a figure, how hard it is for you to put it down. You just keep posing them and turning them and looking at them, standing them in different poses. And that's basically what I went through with all these figures, is just which ones mean more to me and stand out more and look better for me on the shelf to give you some awesome shelf candy. Now next, coming in at number 4 is the Three Jokers Batman. Now, we all know the body mold that this uses. Standard Batman look. Now, whenever these next figures came out, everybody always said, this is the best Batman that McFarlane has released, and then the next one would come out, no, this is the best Batman McFarlane has released. So I remember everybody calling this Three Jokers Batman the definitive Batman. Now, since then, people have changed their opinions. Some people still enjoy this figure. I still like him, even though some things I did not like. Once again, we have the neck plug that limits the articulation of the head. Aside the fact that his head is really short and the head actually sticks low on the body, which gives him a more squat look. But they kind of remedied that because the legs are a little bit longer. Now, one thing I also didn't like was on his boots and gloves and on the cowl, he has a little grainy leather texture, which I would have preferred if they just made it smooth. And this one is actually based on the Three Jokers storyline. But for all intents and purposes, this is a classic standard version of Bruce Wayne as Batman. You can put him in tons of situations, tons of lineups, and he'll fit right in as your definitive Batman. Now when you scale him up next to the Tim Drake Robin, he is actually taller than him by a lot, so he scales really well with him. And that kind of gives you an idea of where we should be going with these Batman. Now, they did do an alternate version, and that was actually in the Bat Family 5-pack, where he had a blue and gray scheme. Now, I think they should have painted the belt and the emblem a bright yellow, which would have made him pop a lot more, but they actually went with a sort of gold tone. Now, that kind of differentiates him from the original release, so that's fine. You have two versions of Batman that you can choose from. Now, I actually took off the paint. These were actually, the trunks were actually painted gray originally, and I removed the paint to give him the blue trunk so that could break up all of that gray on this figure to give it some separation. But that's another way you can go with this Three Jokers version of Batman. Now we're down to the top 3. This is getting pretty tight. I know everybody's, wondering what it's going to be, and I definitely had to go with, coming in third place is the Year 2 Batman. Now, the reason I put him at third place is because although I really like this figure and he's your more classic sort of Neil Adams Batman, there are things that I do not like about him. There are some negatives and some positives. The negatives being, I actually don't prefer cloth capes unless they look really good and are done really well. I actually prefer more of like a pleather sort of rubber looking cloth cape instead of just cloth. Now, of course, everybody has their own preferences, and you may like this cape. I also didn't like the way they executed the ring to hold the cloth cape down. It kind of looks sort of bunched up and doesn't match really well. I do like the way I have him with the cape over the shoulders instead of forward. It just gives him a cleaner look. They did mess up some little details, which was like on the gloves And on the boots, they didn't give him that point in the front, which would have brought him up higher. But I do love this head sculpt. It is a kind of spooky head sculpt, which is rather interesting to say. But he does have that like later 70s darker Batman tone, which I really enjoy. Now, once you pick him up, he's really hard to put down. He does look good. He does display well. He has a nice clean gray color that's pretty crisp. Now, once again, he has that neck plug that kind of restricts the articulation, but it also gives him a little bit of a majestic look. So that is my number 3, the Year 2 Batman. I actually do enjoy him so much that I'm actually trying to pick up a third one. This would be my third Year 2 Batman, and I want that one so I could customize it and play around with it. But he does scale well with the Tim Drake Robin, and of course he would scale well with Dick Grayson Robin and a lot of the other Bat family. So if you want a definitive Batman, this could be the way to go for you. But for me, he just didn't make it to the top. But that is the Year 2 Batman from McFarlane. Now here it is. This is going to be pretty shocking. Some people are going to like it, some people aren't. Some people will understand where I'm coming from, and some people won't. But that is going to be the runner-up. Coming in at number 2 is going to be the Nightfall Batman from McFarlane. Now the problem I have with this figure is his size. Now if you scale him next to the Tim Drake, you could see that he's just a smidgen taller than Tim Drake. He could be a little bit taller. I really wish they would have made him a little bit taller. Now besides that, he's a beautiful figure. Awesome execution of this Batman. I mean, completely new design. He doesn't have the neck plug that a lot of these Batmans do. But there's just small things that I do not like. One is the lighter gray color. Now we did see that McFarlane is going to release that San Diego Comic-Con version of this figure that looks a lot better with a darker gray scheme. But basically it is this figure just with a different paint job. Now as everybody could see, I'm a huge McFarlane DC Multiverse fan. I mean, I buy multiples of each figure. I have the in-box collection. I have them loose. I do custom. I'm always, propping up McFarlane's DC Multiverse. But I have to be honest, and that is that if I don't get my hands on one of those San Diego Comic-Con Batmans right away, it doesn't kill me. It's not going to hurt me. I live on with my life. I keep collecting. I'm still interested in the line. I'm still invested in the line. I love doing custom work with the figures, and I actually do enjoy going out and trying to hunt them down. So the way I look at it, eventually when I do come across one of those exclusive figures, and that'll be cool. If not, it's no big deal. After all, this should be fun for us. This is a fun hobby. We do not need to stress out over if we could get a figure or not. So eventually I'll get them. I'm not worried about it. But as I stated before, this Nightfall Batman to me is just a little bit small. They should have made him a half-inch taller. I'd be really happy with him. Don't get me wrong, he is an awesome Batman figure. I'm not saying that you can't say he's number 1, because of course you can. I'm just you're just hearing the ramblings of a madman. But for me, that's just the thing that really brings him down for me is the height. He's just not tall enough. And that actually segues me into my number 1. Now, basically anybody that's been collecting this line knows what that's going to be, and that is going to be Batman Hush. Now, I do have to single out that this is not the one from the 2-pack. I'm actually not a big fan of that one, mainly for the head sculpt, but also we know that they messed up that release. But he can also be customized to actually work really well. But this Batman Hush for me is still the best Batman. He's so photogenic. He's so fun. Once you pick him up, you just cannot put him down. Now I know a lot of people would think that you have to display him on his own because he's like so large. Everybody knows that. He's like a big hulking Batman, which I actually enjoy. Love the thickness of the neck. Love the head sculpt. Love the colors. Although the belt, I could have gone with a more yellowish toned belt. But when I look at this Batman, he is actually the definitive comic book accurate Bruce Wayne Batman. Now, when you scale him up with this Tim Drake Robin, he is towering over him, and that is what you want. Even with Nightfall, Catwoman, he looks really good. He's just an awesome, awesome figure. Great articulation. Now, there are some negatives, mostly like in the shoulder area. I don't like how they didn't make it a clean transition from the upper shoulder into the arm, into the lower shoulder. But sometimes when you pose him, you can't really see that as much. But I really love that head sculpt. Now, although I'm saying this is my top Batman, the blue version Hush Batman, I actually have a actually my real favorite is my custom black and gray version of Batman. Now, this is my favorite Batman. I've been using him to take tons of photos. He goes well with everybody. I mean, he's just an awesome, awesome custom job I did. Now, that is my favorite Batman. But as for standard releases, I'm going to go with the blue Hush Batman. Now, one figure that these guys do not scale with are any of the Supermen released by McFarlane. But I think the main factor that we need to look at is that we need a bigger Superman to scale with this Batman, and we don't necessarily need to scale up every figure or to scale this Batman down. Batman and Superman are supposed to be huge, intimidating specimens, because even if you put this Batman next to like the gold label Hush Superman, he's taller than the Superman, which should not be correct. They should be basically around the same size. Now, that's my top 10, guys, for now. I'm sure it'll change in the future. I'm sure you guys have your own opinions, but for now, keep hunting out there, keep collecting, keep customizing, and I will see you on the next one.
They used to call me Crazy Joe, but now they can call me Batman.